The world once knew Mel Gibson as Hollywood's golden warrior, the fearless face of Braveheart, the wise-cracking cop from Lethal Weapon, the Academy Award-winning director who could bring armies and empires to life on screen. He was a household name, admired not just for his rugged charm, but for his ability to dominate both sides of the camera. But in 2010, that image collapsed with the speed of a falling star. Suddenly, Mel Gibson was no longer the hero on the battlefield or the silver screen. Instead, he was the center of one of Hollywood's most shocking scandals, a scandal defined not by triumph, but by terrifying words, leaked recordings, and allegations of violence that stunned the world. At the center of this implosion was Oksana Grigorieva, a Russian pianist and singer who had once seemed like the perfect romantic match for Gibson. She was elegant, artistic, mysterious, a woman whose presence felt worlds away from Hollywood chaos. Their love story began with music, passion, and the promise of new beginnings. But it ended in courtrooms, custody battles, and the destruction of reputations. The scandal was not just about a failed relationship. It was about power, rage, and the unraveling of a man who had once stood at the top of the industry. When audio tapes surfaced of Gibson hurling racist slurs, misogynistic insults, and violent threats, the world listened in disbelief. This was not a role. This was not fiction. This was the real man, unfiltered, exposed. For Oksana, the scandal was equally devastating. What had begun as a romance with one of the most powerful men in Hollywood became a nightmare of fear and survival. Her decision to speak out made her both a heroine and a target. She was scrutinized by tabloids, questioned by critics, and forever branded as Mel Gibson's ex. Together, their names became etched into Hollywood's Hall of Infamy. This was not just another celebrity breakup. This was a war that played out in public, complete with restraining orders, custody disputes, and headlines that refused to fade. Tonight, we revisit the full story. From Gibson's rise as one of Hollywood's biggest stars, and Oksana's quiet beginnings in Russia, to the whirlwind romance that became toxic, the shocking recordings that destroyed Gibson's image, and the bitter legal fallout that followed. This is the scandal of Mel Gibson and Oksana Grigorieva, a cautionary tale of fame, fury, and the collapse of a Hollywood king. Mel Gibson, a boy between two worlds. Mel Columcille Gerard Gibson was born in Peekskill, New York, in 1956, the sixth of 11 children in a devout Irish Catholic family. His father, Hutton Gibson, was a strict man, filled with uncompromising views about religion, morality, and society. When Mel was 12, Hutton moved the entire family to Sydney, Australia, convinced America was headed in the wrong direction. For young Mel, this abrupt shift was jarring. Suddenly, he was the American kid with a foreign accent, an outsider in a country still adjusting to him. But that sense of displacement also lit a spark. After finishing school, Mel enrolled at the National Institute of Dramatic Art in Sydney, where his charisma and raw intensity quickly set him apart. By his early 20s, he had landed the lead in Mad Max 1979, a gritty, low-budget film that exploded into a worldwide phenomenon. With Gallipoli 1981 and The Year of Living Dangerously 1982, he proved he wasn't just an action star but a serious actor. By the mid-1982, Lethal Weapon turned him into a Hollywood superstar, and in 1995, his passion project Braveheart brought him 2 Academy Awards. At his peak, Mel Gibson embodied the dream: fame, fortune, critical acclaim, and a large family with his wife Robin Moore, with whom he raised 7 children. To outsiders, he seemed grounded by faith and family. But inside, there were cracks, an explosive temper, battles with alcohol, and a rigidity rooted in his father's strict worldview. These shadows would later play a devastating role in his downfall. Oksana Grigorieva, A Life in Music. Half a world away, in 1970, Oksana Petrovna Grigorieva was born in Saransk, a small city in central Russia. Her family life was modest, but her gift for music was extraordinary. As a child, she displayed remarkable talent at the piano, pouring her emotions into every note. Her passion earned her a place at prestigious conservatories, including in Moscow, where she refined her artistry. Oksana's life was not easy. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the challenges of limited opportunities for musicians pushed her to seek a new path. In the early 1992s, she moved to London, where she taught music and began composing her own works. Her beauty and poise caught attention, and soon she was moving in influential circles. Her personal life intertwined with her professional one. In the late 1992s, she began a relationship with British actor Timothy Dalton, best known for playing James Bond. They had a son together, Alexander, before separating. Oksana continued to focus on her music, balancing the demands of motherhood with her ambitions as a performer and composer. Though not famous in her own right, she built a reputation in niche music circles. She was intelligent, determined, and quietly ambitious. Still, her life remained far removed from the bright glare of Hollywood until fate brought Mel Gibson into her orbit. Two paths converged. By the mid-2000s, Mel Gibson's life was already spiraling. In 2006, he was arrested for DUI in Malibu. The incident itself was bad enough, but his anti-Semitic tirade against the arresting officer went public, leaving his reputation in tatters. Hollywood, once his playground, began to distance itself. It was in this turbulent period that he met Oksana. For Mel, she represented beauty, sophistication, and renewal, a chance to start fresh with someone who wasn't tied to his troubled past. For Oksana, Mel was both a romantic partner and an opportunity. He was still one of the most powerful figures in Hollywood, capable of changing her life forever. Their connection was immediate. What began as a professional collaboration, Mel producing her music, quickly evolved into something deeper. Soon, their names were linked not just by art, but by romance. A collision course. By the late 2000s, their bond had become public, and the world was watching. Mel was in the middle of divorcing Robin Moore, ending nearly 3 decades of marriage. Oksana stood beside him, the new woman in his life, the mother of his 8th child. To outsiders, it looked like a new chapter for both a brilliant Hollywood star seeking redemption and a Russian pianist finally stepping into the global spotlight. But beneath the surface, their personalities were already clashing. Mel, shaped by decades of control and volatility, struggled with insecurity and anger. Oksana, who had spent her life fighting for independence, was not the type to be silenced. Their romance, built on passion, was heading toward a storm that neither could escape. The spark of attraction. When Mel Gibson and Oksana Grigorieva first crossed paths, the timing seemed almost fated. For Mel, the mid-2000s were a turbulent period. His marriage to Robin Moore, the woman who had stood by him for nearly 3 decades and raised 7 children with him, was unraveling. His 2006 DUI arrest and anti-Semitic outburst had shaken his once pristine image. He was desperate for stability, for redemption, not just in Hollywood but in his personal life. Oksana entered his world as a musician whose elegance and sophistication felt like a balm. She was cultured, poised, and unconnected to Hollywood's chaos. For a man like Mel, who had lived under the glare of fame for decades, Oksana seemed to represent something pure and untarnished. Their initial bond was professional. Mel agreed to produce Oksana's album, a project that was meant to showcase her talent as a pianist and vocalist. But as studio sessions stretched late into the night, their connection deepened. Music, with its ability to stir emotions and create intimacy, became the bridge that turned collaboration into romance. Passion and public attention. By 2009, their relationship was no longer a secret. Paparazzi captured images of them dining together, holding hands, and walking arm in arm. The media latched onto the story with fervor. Here was Mel Gibson, Hollywood's fallen warrior, starting anew with a mysterious Russian beauty. The public reaction was divided. Some saw Oksana as a stabilizing presence, a chance for Mel to rebuild his life. Others viewed her skeptically, questioning her motives and branding her as someone who had strategically attached herself to a Hollywood powerhouse. For Mel, the criticism didn't matter. He seemed revitalized, speaking glowingly about his relationship and looking more energized than he had in years. For Oksana, The relationship brought her a level of fame she had never known before. She was no longer just a pianist. In Dalton's ex, she was Mel Gibson's partner. A new beginning, the birth of Lucia. The defining moment of their romance came in October 2009, when Oksana gave birth to their daughter, Lucia. For Mel, this was his 8th child, born decades after his first. He spoke openly about his joy at becoming a father again, calling it a blessing and describing Lucia as a source of hope. For Oksana, the birth solidified her place in Mel's life. She was no longer just a girlfriend or collaborator. She was the mother of his child, part of his family. She appeared alongside him in interviews and red carpet appearances, often smiling as Mel discussed fatherhood. Images of the couple with baby Lucia painted the picture of renewal. A man once mired in scandal finding redemption through love and family, and a woman finally stepping into the global spotlight with her child. Trouble beneath the surface. But even in those early days of apparent happiness, cracks were visible. Friends of the couple noticed arguments that would flare up quickly, often over trivial matters. Mel's volatility, long a part of his personality, began to surface. His temper, fueled at times by alcohol and insecurity, clashed with Oksana's strong will and independence. Oksana, who had survived difficult relationships before, was not someone who cowered easily. She resisted Mel's attempts at control, pushing back when he became demanding. Their passion, so intoxicating at first, began to morph into volatility. Hollywood's divided view. As their romance played out in public, Hollywood remained conflicted. Some industry insiders hoped Oksana might anchor Mel, helping him stabilize after years of turmoil. Others whispered that the relationship was doomed, that Mel's demons ran too deep, and that Oksana was stepping into a firestorm she couldn't control. The press often painted Oksana as ambitious, digging into her past with Timothy Dalton and questioning her intentions. Was she truly in love, or was she seeking fame and financial security? For her part, Oksana tried to deflect the criticism, focusing on her music and her new role as a mother. The foreshadowing of chaos. Despite the glamour of red carpets and the tender images of parenthood, the relationship was already on a collision course. Mel's volatility grew more pronounced, and Oksana confided to friends that life behind closed doors was not as harmonious as it appeared. Still, for a time, they clung to the dream of renewal. They smiled for the cameras, cradled baby Lucia, and spoke of new beginnings. To the outside world, it was a story of redemption. To those closer to the truth, it was a facade of fragile illusion masking the storm that was fast approaching. The cracks widened. By early 2010, the fairy tale romance between Mel Gibson and Oksana Grigorieva was already slipping into chaos. Their daughter Lucia had barely turned a few months old, yet the tension between her parents was boiling over. What had begun with smiles and tender public appearances was unraveling behind closed doors. Mel's demons, his struggle with alcohol, his explosive temper, and his deep-rooted insecurities were impossible to contain. For years, colleagues had whispered about his volatility, his ability to shift from charm to rage in a matter of seconds. With Oksana, that volatility became even more pronounced. Arguments escalated quickly. Sometimes it was about money, sometimes about schedules, sometimes about Oksana's independence and her ties to her former partner, Timothy Dalton. Beneath the surface, it was always about control, the struggle for power. Mel Gibson has spent decades as one of Hollywood's most powerful figures. He was used to control over sets, over scripts, over his public image. In his relationship with Oksana, he demanded that same authority. But Oksana, who had built her life through resilience and determination, refused to submit easily. She resisted his outbursts, pushing back when he became controlling. For Mel, this defiance only fueled his paranoia. He began accusing her of betrayal, questioning her loyalty, and lashing out in anger. Their passion, once intoxicating, had curdled into suspicion and resentment. Alcohol and fury. Though Mel had publicly claimed to have turned away from drinking after his 2006 arrest, old habits resurfaced. Alcohol often acted as gasoline on his anger. Friends later recalled Oksana's fear during these moments, fear not just of words but of violence. She confided to some that she felt trapped, walking on eggshells to avoid igniting Mel's temper. The home that was supposed to be a sanctuary for her and baby Lucia instead felt like a battleground. The recordings. As the fights grew louder and more threatening, Oksana made a fateful choice. She began recording their conversations. She later explained that she did this to protect herself, to document what was happening in case the violence escalated. What those recordings captured would shock the world. Mel's voice, seething with rage, hurled racial slurs, misogynistic insults, and violent threats. He screamed at Oksana, degraded her, and in moments of terrifying clarity, revealed the depth of his fury. When the recordings later leaked to the media, they would destroy what remained of Mel Gibson's career. But in those early moments, they were simply Oksana's lifeline, her proof that she wasn't imagining the danger. Public versus private personas. To the outside world, Mel still tried to project the image of a man in love with his partner and newborn child. He smiled for the cameras, spoke about the joys of fatherhood, and carried on as though nothing was wrong. But those closest to the couple knew the truth. The charm was only skin deep, a mask that barely concealed the anger simmering beneath. The relationship, once painted as a story of renewal, was rotting from the inside out. Oksana's desperation. For Oksana, the situation became unbearable. She was not only trying to protect herself, but also her daughter. The idea that Lucia might grow up in a household defined by fear was too much to bear. Friends later described her as torn, still bound to Mel by love and hope, yet terrified of what he was capable of. She had already sacrificed much for the relationship, but staying meant risking everything. Hollywood whispers. By mid-2010, whispers were circulating in Hollywood. Insiders spoke cautiously about Mel's deteriorating behavior, about the turbulence at home. The man who had once been untouchable was now the subject of concern, suspicion, and fear. Studios, still wary after his 2006 DUI scandal, began to distance themselves further. The storm was building, and everyone could feel it. It was only a matter of time before it broke into the open. The inevitable explosion. The toxic dynamic between Mel Gibson and Oksana Grigorieva had reached a point of no return. Their love, once painted as passionate and redemptive, had become poisonous. Every argument pushed them closer to collapse. Every outburst threatened to spill beyond the walls of their home. And soon, it did. The private rage of Mel Gibson would become a very public scandal, one that would rock Hollywood to its core and redefine his legacy forever. The night that changed everything. In the summer of 2010, tensions between Mel Gibson and Oksana Grigorieva finally erupted into an irreversible crisis. According to Oksana, one night turned violent in ways that left her permanently shaken. She later alleged that during an argument, Mel struck her so hard he knocked 2 of her front teeth loose while she was holding baby Lucia in her arms. For Oksana, this was not just another fight. It was the moment she realized the danger was no longer only about herself, it was about her daughter too. What she once hoped was a man struggling with anger now became, in her eyes, a threat to her family's safety. The legal battle begins. In June 2010, Oksana filed for a restraining order against Mel. The filing described incidents of domestic violence, threats, and an environment of fear. She demanded protection for herself and her child, painting a picture of life behind closed doors that shocked even those who knew Mel's temper. Mel, unwilling to accept this narrative, hit back with his own legal filings. He accused Oksana of trying to extort him, of plotting to ruin his reputation, of leaking information to the press to gain leverage in their custody battle. The war had shifted from their home to the courtroom and soon to the front page of every tabloid in the world. The tapes go public. Then came the bombshell. Audio recordings Oksana had secretly made during their explosive arguments leaked to the media. The world listened in disbelief as Mel Gibson's voice filled the airwaves, not the heroic tones of William Wallace in Braveheart, but the enraged tirades of a man consumed by fury. On those tapes, he hurled racial slurs, threatened violence, and degraded Oksana with shocking language. His words dripped with venom and paranoia. The recordings were replayed endlessly on television, radio, and online, each new clip further dismantling his public image. For decades, Mel Gibson had been one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. But with every word on those tapes, he fell further into disgrace. The carefully built image of the charming rogue, the devoted family man, the visionary director, it all crumbled in real time. Hollywood's shock. The fallout in Hollywood was immediate. Studios severed ties. Agencies distanced themselves. Friends who had once praised his genius now avoided his name. Gibson had already been struggling to repair his reputation after the 2006 DUI incident, but this was different. This wasn't an isolated outburst. It was a sustained, venomous rage, preserved forever on tape. Women's advocacy groups condemned him. Communities targeted by his slurs demanded accountability. For many, the recordings were proof that the industry's tolerance of abusive behavior had to end. Oksana in the spotlight. For Oksana, the tapes were both validation and a burden. On one hand, they proved her claims of abuse. On the other, they placed her in the blinding glare of global scrutiny. She was no longer a private woman, or even just a musician. She was the face of a scandal that had consumed one of Hollywood's most powerful men. The tabloids dissected her every move. Some cast her as a brave survivor, while others questioned her motives. Was she protecting herself and her child, or manipulating the situation for money and fame? The relentless speculation made her life almost unbearable, even as she stood firm in her accusations. The custody war. At the center of the storm was Lucia, their infant daughter. The custody battle over her became a bitter, high-stakes fight. Oksana demanded sole custody, arguing that Mel's behavior made him unfit as a father. Mel countered, claiming Oksana was unstable and untrustworthy. Court documents revealed explosive accusations on both sides. Judges were forced to sift through a tangle of allegations, recordings, and witness testimony. Each new development fed the headlines, keeping the scandal alive week after week. A career in ruins. By late 2010, Mel Gibson's career was in free fall. Projects he had lined up were canceled. His once unshakable box office appeal evaporated. The man who had commanded armies on screen now struggled to command even a sliver of public sympathy. For Mel, the scandal was more than personal. It was professional annihilation. Hollywood could forgive arrogance. It could sometimes overlook addiction, but the tapes were unforgivable. They weren't rumors or whispers. They were proof, undeniable and damning. A scandal without precedent. The Gibson-Grigorieva scandal was unlike anything Hollywood had seen before. It wasn't just about a breakup or infidelity or even violence. It was about the raw exposure of rage, captured on tape and broadcast to the entire world. It stripped away the glamour of celebrity and left only the disturbing reality of what life inside their relationship had become. For Oksana, the breaking point was both an end and a beginning. She had left Mel, spoken her truth, and forced the world to see what lay behind his mask. But the battle was far from over. Ahead lay years of courtrooms, settlements, and the struggle to rebuild two shattered lives. The courtroom becomes a stage. After the recordings exploded across global headlines, the battle between Mel Gibson and Oksana Grigorieva shifted fully into the courts. What had once been whispers behind closed doors was now dissected by lawyers, judges, and the watching public. Oksana filed for full custody of Lucia, citing Mel's violence and unstable temper. She painted a picture of a man whose rage made him unfit to parent. Mel countered with ferocity. His legal team accused Oksana of trying to destroy him financially and professionally. They claimed she had leaked the recordings for leverage, turning a private family dispute into an international scandal. Every filing brought new revelations. Custody hearings revealed text messages, photos, and testimony. Both sides accused the other of manipulation and deceit. What was clear to everyone watching was that the little girl at the center of it all was being dragged into a storm no child should ever endure. The financial settlement. In 2011, after months of vicious back and forth, a settlement was finally reached. Mel agreed to pay Oksana $750,000, spread over several years, and provide housing until Lucia turned 18. The two would share joint custody. For many, the settlement seemed anticlimactic after such explosive revelations. Oksana had once been offered a much larger sum, reportedly around $15 million, if she agreed to stay silent. She refused, saying she would not trade her voice for money. In the end, she walked away with far less but kept her story intact. Mel, for his part, was spared the financial devastation some had predicted. But the damage to his career and reputation was far greater than any monetary loss. Criminal charges. The legal drama didn't end with custody and money. In 2011, Mel Gibson struck a plea deal in a misdemeanor battery case connected to Oksana's allegations. He pled no contest to a single charge, avoiding jail time but accepting probation, counseling, and community service. For a man once celebrated as Hollywood royalty, standing in a courtroom as a defendant was a moment of public humiliation. His mugshot, his probation, these became symbols of how far he had fallen. Oksana's financial ruin. While Mel faced public disgrace, Oksana endured her own struggles. The legal war left her financially drained. In 2014, she filed for bankruptcy, claiming debts of hundreds of thousands of dollars, much of it from legal fees tied to the custody fight. The scandal had also destroyed her career as a musician. Once, she had dreamed of being known for her piano compositions and delicate voice. Now, she was branded forever as the woman who had brought down Mel Gibson. The stigma was heavy, and opportunities dried up. Mel's Hollywood exile. For Mel, the scandal was a professional death sentence. Studios cut ties. His talent agency dropped him. Projects that had once been greenlit were shelved indefinitely. Directors and actors who had once praised him avoided association. He became a pariah in an industry that had once bowed at his feet. While some fans remained loyal, the mainstream audience recoiled. To many, he was no longer William Wallace, the brave warrior of Braveheart, but the angry voice on the tapes. The court of public opinion. The wider world weighed in with unforgiving judgment. Advocacy groups condemned him. Talk shows ridiculed him. Tabloids feasted on every new headline, each detail feeding the narrative of a man undone by his own fury. Oksana's role in the story remained controversial. Some hailed her courage in exposing Mel's behavior, while others painted her as opportunistic. But whatever people believed about her, the one fact no one could deny was the content of the recordings. They spoke for themselves. The attempted redemption. Years later, Mel Gibson would attempt a slow comeback. In 2016, his film Hacksaw Ridge was nominated for multiple Oscars, even earning him a directing nod. Hollywood, always pragmatic, seemed willing to cautiously forgive, but the shadow of the scandal never fully lifted. Interviews about his work inevitably circled back to those tapes, to Oksana, to the years of disgrace. Oksana, by contrast, faded from the spotlight. Her focus shifted to raising Lucia and trying to rebuild a quieter life, away from the chaos. But the scandal had marked her permanently. She would never again be just a pianist or Dalton's ex. She would always be the woman at the center of the Mel Gibson scandal. A legacy of damage. In the end, the fallout left no winners. Mel Gibson's career, though partly rebuilt, was forever scarred. Oksana's life was consumed by financial ruin and public scrutiny. And at the heart of it all, Lucia grew up in the long shadow of her parents' war. The scandal became more than tabloid fodder. It was a cultural moment, a story of power, rage, and accountability. And though years have passed, its echoes remain, a reminder of how fast a Hollywood king can fall, and how devastating the cost of toxic love can be. The scandal of Mel Gibson and Oksana Grigorieva remains one of the most infamous Hollywood implosions of the 21st century. It wasn't just a breakup. It wasn't just a custody battle. It was the public unmasking of a man once hailed as a legend, and the unraveling of a woman who stepped into his orbit only to find herself scorched by the heat of his downfall. A fall from grace. For Mel Gibson, the scandal permanently altered his legacy. No matter how many awards he had won, no matter the brilliance of Braveheart or the commercial triumphs of Lethal Weapon, his name now carried the weight of those recordings. The world had heard him at his ugliest, furious, unhinged, threatening. Those tapes became cultural artifacts, proof that the mask of celebrity can shatter in an instant. Though his talent eventually brought him back into Hollywood's good graces with projects like Hacksaw Ridge, the scars never faded. He remains a figure both admired for his artistry and condemned for his behavior, a cautionary tale of how rage and ego can undo even the most celebrated careers. The cost to Oksana. For Oksana, the scandal was equally destructive, though in different ways. She had come into the relationship as a musician, a pianist, with ambitions of her own. By the time it was over, her career was drowned out by the noise of the scandal. Bankruptcy, legal battles, and relentless media scrutiny left her scarred. She will forever be linked to Mel Gibson in the public imagination, her name less associated with music than with the controversy that defined her life in the late 2000s. Yet, in telling her story and standing her ground, she gave voice to countless women who had suffered in silence. A child in the middle. Perhaps the greatest tragedy was the child caught in the storm. Lucia, born of passion and promise, grew up under the shadow of one of Hollywood's ugliest scandals. Custody battles, court filings, and tabloid headlines ensured that her earliest years were tied to chaos. For her, the story is not just one of celebrity downfall, but of personal inheritance of navigating a family history written in pain and spectacle. A cautionary tale. The Gibson-Grigorieva scandal was more than gossip. It forced Hollywood and the public to confront uncomfortable truths. That power can shield abusive behavior for years. That fame magnifies both triumph and destruction. And that the people behind the headlines are often far more fragile and dangerous than their roles suggest. It was a scandal without winners. A man lost his crown. A woman lost her career. A child lost the innocence of being shielded from public spectacle. Final reflection. And yet, within the wreckage, there are lessons. Fame is not protection. Power does not excuse cruelty. And love, when poisoned by control and rage, can destroy not only careers but lives. The story of Mel Gibson and Oksana Grigorieva endures as a reminder that the Hollywood dream can quickly turn into a nightmare. Behind the lights, behind the cameras, there are always human beings flawed, fragile, and sometimes dangerously broken. Their scandal will forever remain etched in Hollywood history, not as a tale of glamour, but as a warning of how quickly love can curdle into hate, and how far even the mightiest can fall.